UFC 289 Nunes versus Aldana takes place this weekend, and I'm going to go through the entire card, starting with the early prelims, ending with the main events, giving my prediction and breakdown for every single fight on the card, starting with the early prelim opener of Diana Belbita versus Maria Oliveira. Now, this one is pretty difficult to predict. However, I am leaning towards Maria Oliveira because both of these women aren't all that good whatsoever. Maria Oliveira coming off a loss against Vanessa Demopoulos. Not a good look whatsoever. She got out-grappled in that fight. She got knocked down in that fight. She did really outstrike Vanessa Demopoulos at range, but that's not the point. You still lost to Vanessa Demopoulos. And outside of that, she beat Gloria De Paula by split decision. Like, neither of these girls have really had any great performances in their career to really look at and say, this is why I'm going to pick them to win. With Diana Belbita, she lost to Gloria De Paula by unanimous decision. I guess that's something you can look at in terms of, like, similar opponents between the two of them. One of them won against her. One of them lost against her quite convincingly. I'm going to go with Maria Oliveira. From what I see in her fight game, she's a lot faster than Diana Belbita on the feet. She's a lot more talented on the feet. She's got a range advantage while being shorter. All of these things make me feel like she might win on the feet if it does stay a stand-up fight. And judging from Diana Belbita's former opponents, she hasn't scored a takedown on any of them. And the only time that she has was when she scored a takedown on Liana Jujua, or Jujua, whatever her name is, and she immediately got submitted with an armbar. So that's not really a good look for me to trust her grappling in this matchup to carry her to victory. And then she also got out-grappled by Molly McCann in their fight and got taken down 5 times, where she only got 1 takedown. So, again, I'm going to have to go with Maria Oliveira here in a stand-up fight between the two of them by a close decision win. We move on. Up the card, David Dvorak versus Erceg. His name is Steve Erceg. Or Erceg, whatever his name is. I'm going to go with David Dvorak. Not because I don't think Steve Erceg is going to be anything in his career. Like, he might be quite talented. He's fighting out of Perth. We're going to probably see a lot more fighters coming from that part of Australia coming up soon. So we got Jack Della Maddalena from there as well. And now this guy's coming up. He was supposed to be fighting Clayton Carpenter and making his debut. It got postponed a little bit. He's now fighting David Dvorak. I don't like this for him, in all honesty. He is really good, though. He's all right. He's beaten some decent opponents. He's looked good against those opponents. But at flyweight, everyone's really good, which is the problem. Like, some of the unranked guys in the UFC and maybe some other guys around the regional scene are going to be quite bad. But typically, flyweights are really, really good. All of them are. So it's a pretty tough fight to predict here. But I'm going to go with David Dvorak because he showed a better regional career than Steve Erceg did in his career. Like, he fought a guy who was 16-2 in Arsen Tigibov, like a very dangerous opponent, and he submitted him in the second round via rear naked choke. And then he came into the UFC. He already had some good wins on the regional scene before that and a ton of experience and losses as well to learn from. I just think that he's better, much better. Had a fight with Manel Cap, didn't go his way, kept it competitive. Same thing with Mateus Nicolau. He's fought the best of the best. He's not quite there, but I think he'll be able to beat a guy making their debut. So I'm going to go with David Dvorak over Steve Erceg. I reckon he gets this one done via decision, 29-28. We move on up the card. Blake Bilder versus Kyle Nelson. I'm going to go with... I guess I'll go with Blake Bilder over Kyle Nelson. Listen, Kyle Nelson's been in the UFC for a very long time now, but he hasn't really had those performances that make you say, wow, in any way. He lost to Matt Sales. That's not a good look to lose to a guy the quality of Matt Sales. Now, losing to Diego Ferreira, not so bad. Losing to Billy Quarantillo, not so bad. Jai Herbert, and if he lost to have Doohoo Choi go into a draw, and the only reason was because of a wimpy little head clash that happened when Doohoo Choi was on top position. Otherwise, that would have been a win for Doohoo Choi, and this guy wouldn't even be in the UFC. The only guy he's beaten is Paulo Reyes, who was 8-6 in the UFC. So I don't see anything great from this guy. I really don't. And Blake Bilder, although he didn't look amazing against Shane Young, Shane Young is a CKB fighter. I know he's had mixed results in the UFC, but he had a long time to prepare for that fight and a long time between fights. He had 2 years of a break before they gave him that one last chance to get a win in the UFC. And Blake Bilder came in and just sort of outpointed him every single round and won every single round very minorly and looked good in that fight on the feet against a guy from CKB. I know it's Shane Young, but still, I think we've seen in Kyle Nelson's game that he's not going to be anything too great. He's probably not bottom feeder level, but we know his limit. We don't know the limit of Blake Bilder yet. He's undefeated, 8-0-1 with a draw in his third ever fight. So he's on a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fight win streak now. Last few against decent competition. We don't know his limit. We know Nelson's limit. I'm going to gamble on the fact that maybe this guy could be something. And I think he's got good ground game, good stand-up game. Seems pretty well-rounded. So I'm going to side with Blake Bilder getting this one done. We move on up the card. Aiemann Zahabi versus Aori Qileng. The majority of people are picking Aori Qileng here. I'm going to go with Aiemann Zahabi. I like Aiemann Zahabi because much like the other Zahabi, Farah Zahabi, he has a good mind for the game and he always seems to bring in a good game plan to beat the certain style of opponent. Like you can see in the middle of an Aiemann Zahabi fight, oh, that's what they were preparing to do. You know what I mean? You can look in the middle of an Aiemann Zahabi fight against Tercios, who didn't really do much in that fight, I get it, but against Draco Rodriguez, where he found the KO, and you can see him setting stuff up and figuring things out. And the problem I have with Aori Qileng is he's very predictable in what he's going to do. You know what I'm saying? Big power shots, swinging with intensity. Maybe he'll go for a takedown at one moment and try and get that done. He's just very predictable in what he does, and he telegraphs what he does, and he makes it clear what he's about to do. And for a guy like Aiemann Zahabi, who's got such good fight IQ and can figure out a way of getting the win, I think he's going to find a little bit of an easy time minorly outstriking and mixing it up against Aori Qileng, who's being a little bit too predictable. And although he does have some wicked power, it's not like it's consistent enough to save him. Like, he hasn't had a knockout in his last 3 fights, or 4 fights. He's had 1 knockout in his last 4 fights. And if he doesn't get it, there's a high chance he loses at this point. You know what I mean? Like, he's 1 and 2 in decisions in the UFC. And Jeff Molina's a small guy. Cody Durden is a small dude. Aiemann Zahabi is a legit bantamweight fighter. So I feel like he's a big dude. And if the smaller guys can pick and move, I think we're going to be able to see Aiemann Zahabi do it with a little bit more heat behind his shots to keep Aori Qileng honest. So I'm going to go with Aiemann Zahabi getting this one done by 30-27 decision. We move on. Up the card, Jasmine Jasudavicius versus Miranda Maverick. Got to go with Miranda Maverick here. Miranda Maverick is good. We've seen her lose in the UFC. She lost to Erin Blanchfield. She lost to Maycee Barber by split decision. That was one of the worst decisions in the history of the UFC. She clearly won the fight against Maycee Barber, but they gave it a split decision for whatever reason. And the fight against Erin Blanchfield, did she get out-grappled completely in that fight? Yes. But did she get finished like Jessica Andrade and other top contenders that we've seen Erin Blanchfield go up against? No, she stayed in the fight. You know what I mean? She tried to keep going. She was out-grappled non-stop throughout it, don't get me wrong, but she's a solid fighter. Do I see Jasmine Jasudavicius, who's pretty much a striker, being able to out-grapple her? I don't see her being able to out-grapple her whatsoever, and I just think that Miranda Maverick has the advantage here. I think they're going to be pretty even on the feet, maybe an edge towards Miranda Maverick, and I think in terms of if they're even on the feet, Miranda Maverick's the one who can mix up the grappling to her advantage here. She does have a good grappling background, so I'm going to side with Miranda Maverick being able to mix it up a little bit better and get herself a decision win over Jasmine Jasudavicius. We move on. Up the card, Nassourdine Imavov versus Chris Curtis. I am going to go with Chris Curtis here. It's a worrying pick because Nassourdine Imavov is pretty good. But I like the fact that Chris Curtis is willing to take this fight. You know, he took some damage in that Kelvin fight. You know, he got dropped with a head kick for a second and then immediately recovered. So this is a bit of a quick turnaround for him after taking a little bit of damage in his last one and did go to a bit of a war. But I like that because Nassourdine Imavov, as much as he's good, he slows down in fights if he can't get his takedowns. And even if he can get his takedowns, he can still slow down quite a bit as the fight goes on. And in a 3-rounder, I almost feel like he's forced to work more because there's less stalling in a 3-rounder. And it's more a high pace for the 3 rounds that fighters have because they know they've only got 15 minutes. So I feel like there's no stalling time for him here against a cage. He's going to have to work a lot to beat Chris Curtis. And if he has to work a lot, I do see him slowing down. And they've given Chris Curtis as an underdog as well. I've just seen that now. I've just checked the odds. I am going to be picking Chris Curtis as an underdog here over Nassourdine Imavov. He just fought Sean Strickland on like a week's notice. Strickland beat him. Strickland trains with Chris Curtis. They are main training partners of each other. So I think if anyone can help him out for this training camp, it's Sean Strickland, who is in camp right now at the same gym as Chris Curtis and just fought Nassourdine Imavov and just beat him on a week's notice after not training and being out of shape. I know he was up a weight class and it was a catch weight, but still, he was clearly not in good fight shape after his last fight against Cannoneer. Ate a bunch over the holidays and then just walked in on a week's notice and beat Nassourdine Imavov. I think Curtis can as well. He's got great takedown defense, which means I think he's got better takedown defense than Buckley. And Buckley, although was taken down by Imavov, was able to shake off a lot of the takedowns as well. I think Curtis does one better, stops the takedowns in the first place, makes Imavov start to worry a little bit, and then also starts finding that body as the fight goes on and starts winning it as it goes on, and maybe gets a third round TKO, but I think he wins this by decision based on the end of the second round and the majority of the third round as well. I think he wins it as it goes on. We move on to another fight up the card, which is Eryk Anders versus Marc-Andre Barriault. I'm going to go with Marc-Andre Barriault over Eryk Anders. I think it's pretty straightforward. I don't know about you guys, but I'm noticing something in Eryk Anders' game where he's so stiff. He looks like an old man. He doesn't look like an old man, but the way he moves, he seems like he doesn't want to throw his back out, or he just seems so stiff, and he has had some injuries in his career, but he's had a long career so far. Like, I know he sort of came over to MMA quite late in his life, but at the same time, he's been around for a long time. He's had his wars. He's been beaten up badly before in his career. You know, I mean, he's been hurt quite a bit in his career before as well. And we've seen recently the Yun Yong Parks of the world be able to beat him. You know, we just saw him get ragdolled by Petrosky and Joe Pyfer in grappling matches. He beat Kyle Dorcas, but who hasn't? At this point, that's his last win, and the last time he looked good in the cage, and he didn't look too bad. Lost to Andre Muniz immediately. You know, no contest with Darren Stewart. Beat Darren Stewart, but that's Darren Stewart. Lost to Jotko. There's just certain losses here where there's like a gulf in skill between him and his opponents. And the thing about Marc-Andre Barriault is he's so fluid in the cage, coming off a great performance against Julian Marquez, staying active, getting back in there. Do I see Eryk Anders having the speed or the striking skill enough to finish Marc-Andre Barriault in the first round? Because if he wins, I truly believe he has to win by finishing the early rounds of this fight. I don't see him having the skill or the speed or the striking etiquette to finish Marc-Andre Barriault in the first round. And if he doesn't, it's a downhill spiral when you're fighting Marc-Andre Barriault. If you can't get that finish in the first round, the other fighters haven't been able to get as well, he's often going to pick up the pace quite a bit and start landing those shots on you that he needs to land and eventually finish you as the fight goes on. So I don't see Anders getting a finish. I see him trying to go tit for tat, trying to play the game, and I see Marc-Andre Barriault in front of his Canadian home crowd. I see him getting this one done by decision in the last rounds or a finish in the third round, something along those lines. I'm going with Marc-Andre Barriault here for sure. We move on. Up the card, Dan Ige versus Nate Landwehr. It saddens me to say this. You guys know I'm a big Nate Landwehr fan. A huge Nate Landwehr fan. And it does sadden me to say this, but I am going to have to go with Dan Ige here over Nate Landwehr. I want Nate Landwehr to win badly. I really want Nate Landwehr to win. I think he would be great for the UFC, great for the featherweight division. We need some stars in that division right now, and he would fill that role absolutely. And if he wins this one, he has been calling out Movsar Evloev for a long time, and he's got a good style to try and beat Movsar Evloev as well. But I do worry about Nate the Train, because although he beat Austin Lingo, I believe that Austin Lingo, no offense to him whatsoever, but arguably you will take offense to this because you arguably should, Austin Lingo is hot garbage. He is really, really garbage as a fighter, and he's not good. And as much as I like Nate Landwehr, that first round with him and Lingo was quite close. And I saw Lingo a few times, and if you watch that fight, you'll know what I'm saying. I saw him catching Nate Landwehr with his chin up in the air. And although Nate Landwehr's had good wins in the UFC and he's on a bit of a streak recently, we do see him getting caught on the chin quite a bit. Onama hurt him a few times. He beat Ludovic Klein pretty well, to be honest with you, but he got finished by Julian Erosa, finished by Herbert Burns. Shouldn't really be happening. Really close fight with Darren Elkins that he won based on the visible damage rule because Elkins has a bunch of scar tissue, but he still got caught a good amount of times in that fight as well. I know he must have improved and he's looking better in his stand-up, but Ige has those nukes in his hands against a certain level of opponent. Damon Jackson was on a win streak outside the rankings in the featherweight division. You know what I'm saying? Gavin Tucker was on a win streak outside the rankings in the featherweight division. Both of them suffered KO losses. The only fighters Dan Ige has lost to are Movsar Evloev, Josh Emmett, Chang Sung-Yung, Calvin Kattar. Outside of the Josh Emmett fight, which arguably could go to him, by the way. Arguably could go to him. Let's be real here. Arguably could go to him. He's only lost to Calvin Kattar by like a 3-2/4-1 decision. Chang Sung-Yung because he got out-grappled in certain moments and outstruck. And Movsar Evloev because he got out-grappled. You're giving him a guy who's not going to be trying to take him down, who's going to be trying to go tit-for-tat with him on the feet. I think Ige's going to find that big KO blow. I think he's going to finish Nate Landwehr, hurt him badly at one moment, or hurt him badly in enough moments to win himself a decision. So I'm actually going to pick Dan Ige to land a late first-round KO on Nate Landwehr, but I do hope that Nate Landwehr wins this fight. I've just got a real sneaky suspicion that Ige's going to catch him with that chin up in the air, because after watching Nate Landwehr's fights, sometimes you can get sort of blinded by how entertaining they are and not realize, oh my God, this guy's getting hit on the chin quite a bit. So I'm going to go against Nate the Train, although we are rooting for Nate the Train to win. I'm worried he's going to get chinned here, and I'll pick Dan Ige to win. We move on. Up the card, Mike Mallott versus Adam Fugitt. Now, if Adam Fugitt wins, fair play to him, but we know what they've done here for UFC 289. They've put a guy in Mike Mallott who's going to be their next up-and-coming Canadian prospect in the feature fight of the pay-per-view. Should he be in the feature fight of the pay-per-view? No, he definitely shouldn't. But he's in the feature fight of a pay-per-view because they're in Canada and they've given him a really nice opponent for himself. Now, Adam Fugitt in his last performance didn't look that bad, to be honest with you. He looked pretty good against Kinoshita, but we don't know how good that guy really is. And Mike Mallott has been making easy work of opponents that are like, they're not great opponents, but they're opponents that are going to be tricky to get out of there. You know what I mean? Like, they can make some tricky fights for people. Mickey Gall made a tricky fight with Mike Perry. Johan Laness, although, you know, he's had some lackluster performances, he has made tricky fights and gone to close decisions with fighters that are decent and all that. And he got gassed out against Gabe Green after hurting him at one moment, and then Gabe Green come back and finished him. We watched Mike Mallott immediately get him down and sub him. Easiness. Absolute ease. Took him down, subbed him. Easy win. Then against Mickey Gall, he hurt him badly, finished him off. It's like he's making these guys look quite easy, and he's got great grappling. And when I'm looking at Adam Fugitt as an opponent, I don't see him excelling anywhere enough to really make Mike Mallott pay anywhere in this fight. I don't think he has the ability to knock out Mike Mallott on the feet. I don't think he has the ability to out-grapple Mike Mallott on the ground. He's going to have to find something out of nowhere, and that's not something I'm willing to bet on. So I'm going with Mike Mallott. He's been given an opponent. Although they'll never say this, we know what it is. He's the one Canadian rising prospect right now. They've given him a good opponent to make himself a nice big name in Canada and win in the feature fight of the pay-per-view. If Fugitt wins, good for him, but Mike Mallott should win this fight 9 out of 10 times. I reckon he gets a sub in the first round with like an arm triangle. We move on. Up the card, Charles Oliveira versus Beneil Dariush. I'm going to go with Beneil Dariush over Charles Oliveira. As much as I love Charles Oliveira, I'm worried for him in this matchup because Beneil Dariush out-scrambled Gamrot like it was easy, man. So much so, I was doing the Joe Rogan thing where you start diagnosing people with injuries in the fight. And I started saying Gamrot had a broken hand. He didn't have a broken hand. And I watched Beneil Dariush easily out-scramble him. And I know Gamrot's not the best on the feet anyway, because he's not as aggressive, but Oliveira does make mistakes on the feet as well. And that's the worrying thing about Oliveira. And I think if you give Oliveira a striker who's worried about his ground game, Oliveira can that sort of style matchup buys Oliveira about 2 mistakes on the feet where he can get dropped, and they're not going to follow him to the ground. We saw it with Poirier 2 times. We saw it with Gaethje. He eventually gets his way, gets it to the ground in knocking them down or taking them down, and eventually gets a submission. Do I want Charles Oliveira to win? 100% I want Charles Oliveira to win this fight. Always rooting for Charles Oliveira. Do I think he's going to win? I'm not sure, because when you really start doing the math, Beneil Dariush has been looking really good in his recent fights. Took no damage against Tony Ferguson, no damage against Gamrot. Went to a split decision with Diego Ferreira, who gave him some good scrambles, but won that fight. You know what I mean? I think that was a correct decision, even though it was a split. Beat Scott Holtzman, no problems. The only guy who rocked him was Drakkar Klose, and he still found a way to win, and that was all the way back in 2020. I just feel like he's been a lot more consistent recently. He's beaten Gamrot, which is a really good win to have, and shown great takedown defense. So I think it will be up to him to decide where this fight takes place. I don't think Oliveira can force him to the ground. I don't think Oliveira can force him to stand. I think Dariush will have the option of whether or not he wants to take this fight on the ground or keep it standing. It's going to be high pace early on, but Dariush has some heat in those hands, and they're getting better, his hands. And when you look at Oliveira's last few fights, he got dropped by Makhachev. You know what I mean? He got dropped by Gaethje twice. Dropped by Poirier, I believe, twice or once. And maybe he went to the ground like he did with Gaethje the second time. Hurt by Michael Chandler. There are just moments where you worry about him in fights. And if he gets put down in this fight by Dariush, Dariush will entertain the ground game and start doing his thing in the ground game, and he's very good at it. So I am going to have to side with Beneil Dariush. Charles Oliveira's had a long career, he's experienced. And then there's another part of this fight that I don't really like for Charles Oliveira. He was self-admittedly injured for the May pay-per-view card, and now it's the June pay-per-view card. Whatever you think that injury was, it's something that we didn't hear from Beneil Dariush. You know what I'm saying? It's something that we just didn't hear from Beneil Dariush. We heard Charles Oliveira's injured, he needs a little bit of time to recover, and then he's going to try and restart his training camp and fight at the next pay-per-view. I don't like that. If I was picking Charles, that would be enough to lean me the other way back to Dariush anyway. And I am leaning Dariush anyway. So I'm going to side with Beneil Dariush, as sad as it is. I think he gets this one done. We move on up the card. Amanda Nunes versus Irene Aldana. I'm going with Amanda Nunes over Irene Aldana. I do believe that Irene Aldana has a really good chance of winning this fight, because Irene Aldana is a very hit-and-miss fighter. And her record does show that, because eventually she loses a fight and she doesn't keep a crazy winning streak. Or we would have seen her fight for the belt before. But it seems like with Irene Aldana, there's a level of opponent that sort of shows... There's a level of opponent that she can do something crazy to. And she can dominate. And then just a tiny level above that, she meets her match or they score her. You know what I mean? We see that in fights. We saw with Yana Kunitskaya, she got a wicked KO. Wicked KO over Yana Kunitskaya. Slept her in the first round with a nasty hook. Put her down, finished her off. Same thing with Ketlin Vieira. Put her down, finished her off. Those two don't have the striking of Holly Holm. And we saw in between those two performances, those nasty, vicious performances by KO, she took on Holly Holm. And Holly Holm absolutely schooled her. 21-12 in the first, 23-12 in the second, 23-9 in the third, 39-18 in the fourth, and we call that the old Pat Barry Rose ratio there, 39-18, and 48-18, maybe that one's more of the ratio that I talked about, 48-18 in the fifth round. Holm absolutely schooled her in that fight. One judge gave it 50-44, and I worry that with women's MMA, there are those gulfs of skill, where there's just an absolute drop-off in skill level. I say like a barrier reef of skill that there is, where there's just one level here, and then it plummets all the way down, and then you get to another level, and then it plummets all the way down. And I think that's what's going to happen here against Nunes. I think Irene Aldana will get finished in this fight by TKO, taking too much punishment, get stopped standing by TKO after taking too many clean hits. But I do believe that she has an ability to potentially land a KO blow. I'll be honest with you. And she's not a massive underdog for a Nunes opponent because we just saw Pena beat Nunes. I don't see Aldana finish her on the ground. I think if anyone gets this to the ground and makes it work, it's Nunes. We saw in Irene Aldana's last fight with Macy Chasson. Don't get me wrong, she was doing good in that fight. She had submission attempts that were close. She reversed some position. She got back up. She had a knockdown in that fight as well, of course, because of a liver kick to the body. But if we're being honest here, without that liver kick to the body, it's a win for Macy Chasson. It just is. It's a win for Macy Chasson based on outstriking her in the second and third round and out-grappling her in the second and third round. Aldana had a great first round. I just don't see how that's going to last. So I don't like the performance against Chasson. I don't. Even though she did finish her and win. There are better ways that you should be winning that, and I think Nunes would spark Chasson in the first. So I'm going to go with late second round, standing TKO for Amanda Nunes after a bit of back and forth on the feet, and then Nunes starts mixing in some takedowns and doing some damage with them. Like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Toodle pip. I'll see you later. I've got Amanda Nunes by second round TKO, but I do think that Aldana is a decent underdog, and I'm going to have to pick Beneil Dariush, even though I really want Charles Oliveira to win, and he might be able to if he forces the clinch and goes with knees to the body because Dariush is weak to the body. See you later. Goodbye.